Accounts of living with the condition known as restless leg syndrome describe an individual's basic existence in life as their own personal desert, one that is unwelcomed, desolate, and unproductive to a normal, functioning life. And it's typically a journey that begins as one is lying down to rest, relaxing, and going to sleep.
The feeling is, in my mind, is like somebody's hooked my legs up to an electric device, and something, electricity running through my nerves.
Someone that doesn't have it or has never had RLS cannot imagine what people with RLS go through.
One of the difficult things about RLS is finding the correct words to describe what the feeling is like.
And the worst part is, how do you describe it to somebody? You can't. When you say, well, it's kind of like you've got worms crawling inside your legs or your arms, and they just look at you, and that isn't an adequate description. I can't tell you what it's like. Electricity, worms, feeling like you gotta get out of your body.
Two early descriptions of restless leg syndrome and periodic leg movement were made by English neurologist Sir Thomas Willis and Swedish doctor Karl-Axel Ekbom. They noticed patients that had anxiety in the lower limbs at the time of the sleep-wake transition. These patients experienced sudden jerks and sporadic needs to move that ultimately resulted in sleepless nights. In his studies in 1672, Sir Thomas Willis confirmed that the clinical symptoms associated with RLS existed in the 17th century. These symptoms were identified and provided a name for by Dr. Ekbom in 1945 as restless leg syndrome. The brain, in attempting to process RLS, activates symptoms that at full onset may create the urge to move, revealing a creeping, tugging sensation, not unlike insects crawling through the legs or even over other parts of the body. This very personal pain, extended from the brain, becomes a sleeplessly lonesome and almost unbearably vast desert, unshared by family, colleagues at work, or the world of unnoticing others that surround their daily living.
If someone wanted to torture me, this is what they do. They put me in a little box and at this time of day, and I just go nuts.
And people ask me, what's it like to have RLS? My first answer is, it's awful.
I just all of a sudden have to do this, and I can't hold a pen or a pencil and sit any longer at the computer, and it's like spilkies. It's the only thing, it's a word my parents used to use when we couldn't sit still.
Well, the worst part of having RLS is not being able to sleep. And when my RLS has been really bad, I have gone nights when I haven't slept at all. And, sleep deprivation is a form of torture. I mean, you just can't function properly.
I've been told in public to stop behaving childishly. I've been told in public, don't I know how to behave in public? I've been asked to stop moving in public places. It's pretty embarrassing.
It affects every little part of my life, especially fear. Fear because the fear of being stuck somewhere. The fear of being cramped in an airplane where they're putting on the seatbelt sign and I'm thinking, there's not a chance I can sit here. It's just torture.
When I was a teenager, I had the symptoms. I would be sitting maybe at home in a chair watching TV in the evenings, and that's when most of the time it would hit anyway. It's in the evening time, and I would just have this uncontrollable urge to move my legs, and I would find myself rubbing my legs, and my parents would say, "What are you doing?" I said, "My legs hurt." And that's the way I described it, which was not really very descriptive because the legs don't hurt.
I had never heard of RLS before I started experiencing symptoms around age 48. And these developed to the extent that I had to take early retirement at age 50 from a Wall Street job. What I experience is a feeling like worms are crawling under my skin. And the symptoms don't stop. I experience them 24 hours a day. And when I first started experiencing them, they caused sleep deprivation. And that led to depression and despair because the symptoms just would not stop.
In the desert, any rain can prompt fast and unexpected adjustments. Like the idea that some things were built to accommodate sudden changes, much can be said about RLS since Dr. Ekbom first published his doctoral thesis on the disease in 1945. First, we've learned that this condition affects an amazing number of sufferers around the world. Because it's a neurologic malady that has a genetic component, it can be inherited and often runs in families.
RLS is a very common condition. Okay, a number of studies have looked at it, and it ranges from 2 to 3% to all the way up to 15% of everyone has RLS. Now, there are a couple caveats to that. By definition, if you've ever had a night of RLS, you have RLS.
I think in the United States, the prevalence for restless leg syndrome is easily 5%, with about 2 to 2.5% having, I think, significant morbidity in relationship to it, and thus requiring treatment. And by that I mean significant sleep loss, loss of quality of life, work-related problems, issues of depression and anxiety.
There's also certain demographics that are more common, so it's somewhat more common in women than men, maybe twice as much as common in women than men. And there's also certain ethnic backgrounds where it seems to be more common. It's most common in Northern European ancestry, and as you go farther south and farther east, it tends to be less common.
Most Northern Europeans, Germans and Scandinavians have the highest prevalence, with the Mediterranean having the lower prevalence. And the distribution tends to follow the same distribution as a iron-related gene, which is hemochromatosis. From my perspective, it's very high among Scandinavians, and the way I see it is, what would make a bunch of guys get in a boat and have to row across a cold Atlantic day and night, but restless legs? That was the only way things were ever going to settle down. So.
As far as prognosis, again, anything can happen. As a rule of thumb, it gradually worsens over the decades of life, although sometimes in very late life, in 80s and 90s, it seems to improve in patients.
And when we did the study, we found it occurs in the old people who are relatives of RLS patients. So it probably reflects a shared genetic propensity. And now they've discovered that indeed, just looking at people with periodic limb movements, they have some of the same at-risk alleles for periodic limb movements that we have for restless legs, suggesting that the periodic limb movements reflect the existence of at least some of the genetic propensity for RLS.
Walking through a chili field in Hatch, New Mexico is like a stroll through a garden to some. To others, it's like walking through rose bushes. So like the sensation of thorns rubbing against your body can seem unbearable, dealing with the struggle of RLS becomes the inevitable and unenviable daily task of every RLS sufferer. For many afflicted with this disease, taking many forms of food or drugs or added activities to eliminate the symptoms becomes the daily routine of hoped-for relief.
There are 4 FDA-approved medications for restless legs, and there are others that we use in addition. 3 of the FDA-approved medicines are dopamine agonists. The other FDA-approved medicine is gabapentin mecarbil, which works in a very different way, and it tends to help a little bit more with the painful component as well. Other medicines that are used include narcotic-type medications in severe cases, and high-dose iron or intravenous iron we use in refractory patients as well. We have very good treatments for restless leg syndrome, but there's no evidence that any of these treatments are a cure, so that a one-time treatment will fix the problem and it will not come back.
If you're comfortable following a patient closely for augmentation, you can do the dopamine drug, but be aware you may have to take them off. If you have to take them off, coming off the dopamine drug is not always easy. It can be difficult because they'll have a withdrawal problem. Dopamine drugs do generate that. So the alternative of starting on the alpha-2 deltas is you don't face that, but you do face the adverse effects from the alpha-2 deltas. So, and you also have to be a little patient.
When it comes to deciding what treatment we use for RLS, there's very little head-to-head data. There's never been a study of drug A versus drug B and which one is definitively better. So it comes down to a great deal of individualization.
My general sense is that I'm willing to be comfortable with whatever the patient presents with that seems to work for him or her, that I don't think is potentially detrimental to their health. I have one of my patients with 5 different medications. You know, 2 of the standards and 3 of some unusual off-the-shelf stuff that I, from my own pharmacological interest, felt might work, might be synergistic. And for him, it's working.
In 1879, New Mexico was still just a territory, and when the first railroad tracks were laid down in the area, many aspects of life were greatly changed. Where the tracks were laid down, wagons soon became obsolete because a train track always made providing everyday needs to a specific destination easier. Once placed in motion, a train will go wherever the track leads. Where medical science has progressed in identifying treatments to deal with the symptoms of RLS, augmentation is a word that can knock a train right off its tracks.
Treating RLS with dopamine agonists can be a double-edged sword. They are often extremely effective, and they may be effective for many, many years without any problems whatsoever. It's hard to pass up a medicine that can be as effective as that. That said, these are the medicines that also seem to result in this augmentation or this worsening down the road.
The disease is progressing and they're on a dopamine agent, then the probability it is not the disease. It is the symptoms being driven by the drug itself. And therefore, in our effort to get patients off this, we discovered all the problems, but also the eventuality when you got off the medication, the disease went back to its original form, thus indicating that it was reversible and all drug-driven. So we coined the term augmentation to separate it from the concept of simple tolerance.
All of these drugs have problems. You have to weigh the balance. The one thing we know, though, is if you're going to give a dopamine agonist, our data is very clear. The study was beautiful because it clearly showed that it was a dopamine drug that produced the augmentation. And so a dopamine medication is almost certainly going to produce some augmentation eventually.
And it's characterized by deterioration in their clinical status. So now all of a sudden, they may have more severe symptoms at night than they had before. They start developing daytime symptoms that they never had before. They start to develop symptoms in upper limbs as well as lower limbs. In other words, things just go south.
Because I get to see the patients who come to see me and they'll tell me what happened. My family doctor started me on X and I've ended up on Y. The end point comes when the patient returns after a couple of years saying my symptoms are worse. And the physician's response is to increase the dose. Initial increase is not bad, and if you start low and you go up a little bit. The problem is that at some point in time, the patient will be back within a year and symptoms worse, so we increase it again. Then it'll be back in 6 months, and it'll increase it again. It'll be back in 3 months, and increase it again. All the while, the patient's symptoms start out as, say, initially just a nighttime problem. But at the end of a couple of years, 3 or 4 years, they're up on a huge dose, and the symptoms are starting in the morning now. The patient's getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep. They can't sit down in the evening. Something's wrong with this picture here. I mean, he came to the doctor originally with some sleep problems at night and RLS, and now it's a 24/7 problem.
With augmentation, you see a much accelerated rate of disease condition, of worsening symptoms than you do otherwise. If you have severe RLS and you don't have any medications available to help control it, it is living hell.
The dopamine agonists, they make the doctors look like heroes, because if a patient has this and gets a dopamine agonist, it's going to go away for a while. And you're going to think whatever doctor gave you this is brilliant. And the doctor thinks, well, I'm brilliant because this is working so well. What they don't realize is it just wait 4 years or wait 3 years, and it's going to turn around and make it worse.
The reason that the dopamine agonists, I can't take them anymore, is because I developed augmentation, which means that you develop greater symptoms oftentimes earlier in the day, and there is some belief that those dopamine agonists can actually start feeding the disease.
I didn't realize how much RLS was really affecting my life until I got on Mirapex, and it just suddenly, like all of I became normal. And I was on the drug probably 15 years, and then suddenly one day, the RLS just went into overdrive. It just got super bad. I said, look, doctor, I'm going crazy. I'm from this. I can't sleep. I can't think. I can't function. And he says, I know exactly what's wrong with you. And I said, well, good. Let's fix this thing. And he said, we can. He says, and that's the good news. He said, but the bad news is, he says, you're going to go through 34 days of the worst days of your life. And then we'll work on putting you on something else after we get you off of this. So.
Augmentation is exactly what I'm dealing with right now. I took the first pill and it stopped. That next month or so, when the medication was working like it was supposed to, was fantastic. Unfortunately, the effectiveness wears off with time. So now got switched to a second drug, and I'm probably ending my time with the second drug.
Today, I am taking methadone, and people are very shocked when they hear that I'm taking methadone. I'm a 71-year-old grandmother. I don't look like an ex-heroin addict, and people associate methadone with heroin. But it is a drug that has proved to be very beneficial for people with RLS.
At the RLS Foundation, our mission is to improve the lives of the millions of men, women, and children who live with this often devastating disease. The goals of the foundation are to increase awareness, improve treatment, and through research, find a cure for restless leg syndrome.
We are a patient services organization, so our job is to provide the information and program services that people need to help them with their RLS care. We're doing a great job. We're growing. We've grown 25% this year, and we're projected to grow more next year. We have an incredible staff, and people are realizing that we're a phone call and email away from help.
And the roof is sort of leaky, shutters sometimes bang.
When I first developed these symptoms, I really felt I was at a loss because I could not get any good advice from doctors. I discovered the Restless Leg Syndrome Foundation, and through them, they put me on to a doctor who had knowledge about RLS. It really requires the patient to become knowledgeable, him or herself, about the disease, and to find a doctor who is knowledgeable and a doctor who is willing to enter into a two-way dialogue to try and address the challenges of this disease. And I was fortunate enough to find just such a doctor.
And like Spanish missions established in the 16th century by Franciscan friars to offer sanctuary for a wayfarer's rest and well-being, the RLS Foundation was established through medical research and cutting-edge dialogue to promote a cure and provide a sanctuary for the information, education, and well-being of the RLS sufferer.
I'm able to work with the Restless Leg Foundation and help other people. I've been through it long enough that I pretty well understand the cycle and when people get into serious condition. Make sure that I don't try to be their doctor, I try to be their friend and their hope, and helping other people. It's just, that's what it's all about.
I always remember my job is to provide support and to serve the community, but we also provide hope. Every one of my staff members, we get the calls, the cards, the emails, we share all that, we're excited. And so, you know, that's why you see who's in this video. These are people who have touched us, who have called us, who want to be a part of us too. So, you know, it's exciting.